Imagine waiting 3 long days at a train station, clutching nothing but a suitcase full of hope and a heart full of fear, and no one ever comes for you. Just as you're ready to give up, a little voice tugs at your dress, a child in dusty boots, looking up at you with wide eyes. And then those words that would change your life forever: will you marry my daddy instead? Stay with me, because this is not just a love story, it's a story of second chances, of broken hearts finding healing, and of how sometimes, the family we dream of comes to us in the most unexpected way. The station clock ticked in slow, heavy beats that seemed to echo inside Margaret's chest. She sat on the hard wooden bench, her back stiff, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap as if the sheer grip of her fingers could hold her unraveling hope together. 3 days. She had counted each one, every hour stretched into an eternity of waiting, staring at the tracks until her eyes blurred, listening for the whistle that never sounded for her. Around her, the world kept moving. Families reunited with cries of joy, lovers embraced with promises renewed, and children tugged eagerly at their mothers' skirts as trains hissed and steamed into the platform. But no one had come for her. The letter had been so clear, so full of promises. He would be there when she arrived, a man she had never seen but trusted enough to leave behind the crumbling remains of her old life. A man who said he wanted a wife, someone to cook meals, to share the burdens of the farm, to bring warmth to a lonely house. Margaret had clung to those words, fragile and hopeful, imagining herself stepping into a new chapter, one where she belonged. And yet, here she was, abandoned before the story could even begin. Her small suitcase sat by her feet, scuffed from the long journey. Inside it were the last remnants of her life: a simple dress, a shawl her mother once knitted, and a Bible worn thin from years of being thumbed through during lonely nights. She had sold everything else to afford the train ticket. It struck her now, as the 3rd day slipped away, that she had gambled her entire future on the trustworthiness of a stranger's letter. And she had lost. Margaret's stomach growled quietly, reminding her she hadn't eaten properly since the first day. The bread she packed had gone stale, and the apple she saved for, just in case, had bruised and spoiled in the heat. She sipped from the tin cup of water she refilled at the station's pump, but it did little to chase away the hollow ache inside her. Hunger, yes, but more than that, loneliness, fear, the sharp edge of shame. She lowered her head and whispered a prayer, though her voice cracked with doubt. She told herself she would leave tomorrow, though the truth was she had nowhere to go. Her parents had been gone for years, her only sister married off and moved far away, her letters unanswered. The tiny town she had come from was little more than dust and worn faces, people who had made it clear there was no place for a girl like her, too plain, too poor, too much of a burden. She had dreamed this journey would prove them wrong, that she would find someone who wanted her, someone who needed her. Now, she wasn't sure if she believed in such things at all. Her gaze drifted over the platform, where a few late travelers lingered. A woman with a baby rocked gently in her arms. A group of men laughed as they smoked cigars and shuffled cards against their knees. A boy no more than 10 ran circles around the posts, his boots clattering against the boards. Margaret tried not to envy them, but her eyes burned. She had no one to belong to. It was then she felt it, a soft tug at the hem of her skirt. She startled, looking down quickly. There he was, a small boy standing before her. Dust clung to his scuffed boots, his shirt bore patches stitched with care but worn thin, and his trousers were too short, exposing skinny ankles. His hair stuck out at odd angles as though he had been running wild all day. But it was his eyes that caught her, the large, solemn brown eyes staring up at her with something that looked like hope. "Miss." His voice was soft but carried a surprising steadiness. Margaret blinked, unsure if she should answer. "Yes, child, are you waiting for someone?" he asked. The question pierced her more deeply than she expected. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I was," she admitted after a pause. "But it seems they aren't coming." The boy studied her as though weighing her words carefully. He shifted on his feet, then straightened his small shoulders as though he carried something important. "Would you," he hesitated, then said with startling clarity, "would you marry my daddy instead?" For a moment, Margaret thought she had misheard him. She stared, her lips parted, her breath catching in her chest. "What?" she whispered. The boy didn't back down. His eyes grew even wider, pleading. "My daddy works hard, he's kind, he don't smile much no more. But if you come, maybe he will." Margaret's heart twisted, not just in surprise but in something deeper, a sharp ache for the loneliness she heard in his words. Her instinct was to shake her head, to tell him that such a thing was impossible, that marriage wasn't arranged by children. But the look on his face held no childish mischief, only earnest longing. "Sweetheart," she said softly, crouching down so her eyes met his. "Where is your daddy?" The boy lifted a small hand and pointed toward the far side of the platform. Margaret followed his gaze and saw him. A tall man stood there, his broad frame outlined against the fading sun. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, but she could see enough to read the lines etched deep into his features. His stance was steady, his arms crossed against his chest, but there was a heaviness in the slope of his shoulders, a grief she could almost feel from where she stood. The man didn't move closer. He simply watched, his eyes fixed on them, as though deciding whether to step forward or retreat. Margaret's pulse quickened. This was absurd, she told herself. She had come for a promise that had already failed her, and now a stranger's child was asking her to take up a new one that made even less sense. And yet, something in the boy's earnest face held her still. Perhaps it was because she knew what it meant to be unwanted. To long for someone to choose you, even when the world had turned away. She reached out and brushed the dust gently from the boy's sleeve. "What's your name?" she asked. "Eli," he answered quickly. "Well, Eli," she said softly, "I don't think things are as simple as all that. But you're very brave to ask." His lip trembled slightly, but he held her gaze. "I just don't want Daddy to be sad forever." The words stole her breath. She looked again at the man by the platform, and for the first time, she wondered not about her own abandoned future, but about theirs, this boy with 2 big boots and 2 heavy hopes, and the father who stood in the shadows like a man already carrying a mountain on his back. Margaret knew she should stand, gather her things, and board the next train. She knew she should walk away before this child's wish tangled itself into her heart. And yet, against every piece of reason she clung to, she stayed. Something about this moment felt like more than chance. It felt like the beginning of a question her heart had been waiting years to answer. The man did not approach them at first. He remained by the far post of the platform, his figure outlined against the lengthening shadows, his hat pulled low as if to guard against the world. Margaret felt Eli tug gently at her hand, urging her forward. Her feet were reluctant, but her heart carried her toward the man who stood like an immovable stone. With each step, she felt her pulse hammer harder, the suitcase knocking softly against her leg as she tried to summon the courage to face the father of the boy who had spoken words that turned her life upside down. When they stopped a few paces away, Eli lifted his chin with the courage only a child could muster. "Daddy," he said, his small voice sharp with certainty, "this lady's waiting too. She don't got nobody, you don't got nobody, so you should marry her." Margaret's cheeks burned with heat as though the entire station could hear the boy's proclamation. She opened her mouth to speak, but the man was quicker. His voice was deep, steady, and worn with weariness. "Eli, that ain't how life works." He looked down at his boy, not unkindly, but with a sternness that showed years of teaching hard truths. Margaret's embarrassment tumbled into words before she could stop them. "I'm sorry," she blurted, her voice thin. "Your boy only meant well. He was trying to help." She clasped her hands together, unsure if she should explain more or flee back to her lonely bench. The man finally looked at her fully, and the moment his eyes met hers, something inside her shifted. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much sorrow, who carried grief like an extra weight on his broad shoulders. And yet, behind the heaviness, there was kindness, unspoken, perhaps forgotten, but not gone. "He misses his mama," the man said simply, his voice rough. "She's been gone a year. He thinks if I had someone, I'd smile again." The confession landed heavy between them, filling the space with something raw and real. Margaret swallowed, her own throat aching. She wanted to reach for Eli, to comfort him, but she stayed still, her fingers digging into the worn leather handle of her suitcase. "I didn't mean to intrude," she whispered. "I was waiting for someone who never came. Eli must have seen I looked as lost as I feel." The man's jaw softened slightly, and then he extended a hand, large, calloused, steady. "Caleb Turner," he said. "This here's Eli. We've got a ranch not far from here." Margaret hesitated only a breath before placing her gloved hand in his. The warmth of his skin startled her after days of cold emptiness. "Margaret Hayes," she said, her voice steadier now. A long silence followed, broken only by the distant cry of a conductor announcing another departure. The whistle of the train shrieked across the platform, and Margaret found herself glancing back at the benches, at the place where she had spent 3 days waiting for someone who never cared enough to come. She wondered if she had the courage to keep waiting for a life that might never find her. Caleb's voice brought her back. You got anywhere to go? The question nearly unmade her. She wanted to say yes, to pretend she had a plan, to preserve a shred of pride. But the truth pressed against her chest until she could no longer hold it in. She shook her head, eyes burning. No, I don't. Eli, quick as a bird, grabbed her skirt again and looked up at her with that same pleading gaze. Then come with us, he said. Please. Margaret's heart clenched. She stared down at the boy, then up at his father, torn between fear and something that felt like destiny. Caleb's expression was guarded, not unkind, but careful. He looked at her like a man weighing risks, a man who had already lost too much to gamble lightly. It's madness, her thoughts whispered. She had met them only minutes ago. She knew nothing of their home, their lives, or the shape of the burdens they carried. And yet, wasn't it also madness that she had left her old life for a stranger who never appeared? Wasn't it true she had nothing waiting for her in the world she had left behind? Perhaps madness was all she had left to build upon. Her gaze lingered on Eli's hopeful face. He was a boy who had already endured too much loss, who was asking for something bigger than he could possibly understand. Yet the sincerity of his plea stirred something deep in her, something that had long been buried beneath loneliness and disappointment. Margaret tightened her grip on her suitcase and drew a shaky breath. I'll come, she whispered. Eli's grin broke across his face like sunlight through storm clouds, wide and unrestrained. You will. His little hands clapped together in joy. Caleb exhaled slowly, as though releasing air he had held for far too long. His expression was difficult to read, part relief, part uncertainty, part resignation. He gave a single nod. Then let's get you home. Margaret followed as Caleb led the way across the platform, Eli skipping between them, his boots clicking against the boards. She glanced one last time at the station bench where she had waited so long, and for the first time, she felt no pull to return. That chapter was over. Whatever lay ahead, she had chosen it, even if it was a choice born out of desperation and hope mingled together. They reached a modest wagon tied to a sturdy horse, dust already gathering along the wheels. Caleb lifted her suitcase into the back with ease, then turned as if to offer her a hand up. Margaret hesitated. The weight of what she was doing pressed heavily upon her. She wasn't simply stepping into a wagon, she was stepping into a life that wasn't hers, with people she had only just met. But when Eli reached up his hand, small and insistent, her doubts quieted. She climbed aboard, settling onto the rough wooden seat beside Caleb, her skirts rustling around her. Eli scrambled up after her, nestling close as though afraid she might vanish if he let go. Caleb flicked the reins, and the horse started forward, pulling them away from the station, away from her waiting, away from the emptiness that had nearly swallowed her. The road stretched ahead, winding into fields touched golden by the last light of evening. Margaret sat in silence, her hands folded in her lap, her heart racing with questions she dared not voice. What kind of man was Caleb beyond this moment? What kind of boy was Eli when his grief wasn't pushing him to matchmake strangers? What kind of life awaited her at the ranch? Caleb kept his eyes on the road, his jaw set, saying little. Yet every now and then, Margaret caught him glancing at her, as if he too was filled with unspoken questions. The quiet was not uncomfortable, though, it was heavy with possibility. Eli, resting against her side, spoke softly as they rode. You'll like our place, he promised. There's chickens, and a dog, and a swing Daddy made for me from a tree. And sometimes at night, you can see all the stars. I think Mama can see them too. Margaret pressed her lips together, fighting the sting of tears. She wrapped an arm around the boy, pulling him gently closer. I'd like to see those stars, she said. Eli's face lit up, and Caleb's hand tightened briefly on the reins, though he said nothing. The wagon rolled on, carrying them into the unknown, and Margaret realized she had not felt this strange mixture of fear and hope in years. Perhaps it was madness, but as the last whistle of a departing train echoed behind them, she chose to believe it might also be the beginning of something she had prayed for all along.